In this session, we're going to learn how to import data into SPSS and do a few other things needed before we start the analysis. So go ahead, open up SPSS, and this is what you should see. There's going to be a dialog box, give you some options on how to open up our existing data file. Before we do that, however, I wanted to point out something important here. There's a tutorial in SPSS that's actually really helpful. Let's go ahead and open that up and I'll show you what it looks like. So what's going to happen is it's actually going to open this up in the browser. This is an SPSS tutorial page, topics in here that once you get up to speed on SPSS and you want to look something up, you could use it that way, or if you actually want to go through these at this point, you're welcome to do so. But for now, I just wanted to let you know the resources there. So for example, working with output, cross-tab tables, etc. Alright, so I'm going to close this out for now though. So we're back to this screen. The dialog box is gone, but that's alright. What I'm going to show you how to do next is how to import the data from scratch. So what we're going to do is click on Data, click on File, Open, since we have an existing data file, and Data. So the first thing I need to do is navigate to wherever my data file happens to be. Alright, now SPSS defaults to looking for these .sav files. That's its native format. We haven't created one of those yet. Instead we have an XLS file. So what I need to do is tell it that that's what we're looking for. Alright, so now select your file, however you've named it. Go ahead and open that up. So another dialog box shows up. We're going to actually leave these defaults as is, but I want to explain what they are. Within Excel, you could have multiple worksheets. And so if that were the case, you'd want to specify which worksheet to pull the data from, and also specify the range of the data, what cells you actually want to import. In this case, the worksheet that I'm pulling from, there's only one worksheet in that file, and I want all of the data. So I'm just going to say OK. So the data has been imported into SPSS. First thing I want to point out is that there are really two different views to the data at this point. If you click over down here where it says Data View down in the bottom left corner, you click on Data View. That's what the data looks like really when you're looking at it in Excel. And we can look at it here too. Across the top we have all of our variable names which have been imported, and then we have all of our data with each respondent taking up one row. This is the data view. Go back down and click instead on variable view. In variable view we don't see the individual data rows. Instead what you have are each of the variables and some information about each of these variables. For example, type, that's the dwelling type. SPSS assumes that that's numeric data. The data field happens to be 11 spaces wide, and it assumes correctly in this case that it's nominal data. So the first thing that we need to do, and this is really important, is specify what type of data we have. So SPSS has taken a guess at this, but it's not always going to be right. And it's really important under this measures column right here to correctly specify the type of data, because SPSS, based on how you specify the data, is going to recommend different analyses and graphs. And so it really needs to know what type of data that we have. So let's go ahead and clean that up. Type text, that's just text, so that's fine. Bed, so bed is scale data. Now remember, when you're thinking about different types of measurement scales, we said that there were four. There are nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. However, SPSS treats interval and ratio as if they were the same thing, and it calls them scale. So it's important to know the difference between all four data types, but within SPSS we can refer to interval and ratio simply as scale. Bed is an example of a scale variable. So is bath. The way I recoded distance, it is also scale. Transportation. Do you have transportation? Yes or no is nominal. Rent is correctly scale. Utilities is nominal. Aha, this is incorrect. So decor. This is one of 5 questions I asked to get at this idea of the interior atmosphere of your apartment or house. And these are actually scale questions. I'm going to go ahead and change all of those. Similarly for the neighborhood questions, right? See, I've got here neighborhood 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are also scale questions. Choice. Would you choose to live in this place again? Yes or no? That correctly is identified as nominal. Gender is nominal. Is English your native language? Yes or no is nominal. Section is correct as nominal. And group, even though there might be, for example, 1 through 8 groups, that's just categorical, meaning that still is nominal. So we specified really the data type, here it's called measure, for each of the variables. So we specified really the data type, here it's called measure, for each of the variables. The next thing we want to do is give all of these variables appropriate labels. So these are the labels that will be used as SPSS generates graphs and different analyses. In this case, since we spent some time really thinking about good variable names, I can simply go over, highlight the variable names, copy that column, highlight this column, and do a paste. And it's going to paste down all of those same names. Alright, there's one other thing that I'd like to do before moving on, specific to each of the variables. And some of these we'll need to worry about, other variables we won't. Think back to when we talked about type. Type, let's go back into the data view. The data that was exported from Qualtrics has type identified as either a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And those codes mean something to us. When we think about the variables table, we identified what each of those numbers represents. So, for example, dorm is 1, apartment is 2, house is 3, and so forth. But SPSS doesn't know that yet. So what we need to do is enter in that information, and again that'll help us when we start to do some analyses, generate graphs, etc. So to do this, what I'm going to do is select data, define variable properties, and I'm going to pick whichever variables I want to work with. In this case, let's just focus on type. Select type in here and select continue. So what you see here is that these are the different possible response options. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. There is no 5. 5 was yurt, and nobody said they lived in a yurt, so that's why it didn't even bother to include it. This is the number of people that responded and said that they lived in a dorm, apartment, house, and so forth. What we need to do is give those labels. So I'm going to enter in those labels now. Dorm, apartment, house, condo. 5 was yurt. We'll skip that one because nobody said they lived in a yurt. And this is other. I click OK. You can see this output screen. We're going to see this quite a bit. This is basically the program code that SPSS is running in the background. And sometimes we'll care about these output screens because they'll have graphs and charts. But right now we don't. We just need to know that it correctly processed what we asked it to. We don't need to save this output. But now we know that we've changed type, and we can do that for other variables as needed. For example, another variable that I want to provide specific labels for the choice options is gender. So let's look at that one. Data, define variable properties. Scan down to gender, select that, and hit continue. So here are the two values that were exported from Qualtrics. And I know, because I went back and looked at those codes within Qualtrics and entered those on my variables table, that in this case a -1 means male and a +1 means female. So again, we'll see how this is useful as we get into our different analyses. Next, I'm going to show you how to create some new variables based on existing variables. There are different situations where you'd want to do this. Let me give you an example. Next, I'm going to show you how to create some new variables based on existing variables. There are different situations where you'd want to do this. Let me give you an example. So let's say we're looking at the variable type. And again, remember that was dorm, condo, etc. Let's say you're interested in doing an analysis where you just want to compare the responses for people who said they lived in a dorm versus all other. The problem is right now we've got codes of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. What we really want to do is compare everyone whose code is a 1, meaning they lived in a dorm, with everyone else who lived in any of the other dwelling types. So here's what we want to do. Essentially what we're going to do is take this current type variable and transform it into a new variable. So click transform, recode in a different variable. You could recode in the same variable. That's going to overwrite our data, and we don't want to do that. So let's recode into a different variable. I want to take my type and select it. So now I need to give this new variable a name. I'm going to call this type new. Copy that, put in the label, and importantly, click on change. Only after I do that does it now show correctly here that I'm taking data from the variable type and I'm transforming it in a way that we'll see in a second over into a new variable called type new. Now I need to give it the logic for how to do that. Click on old and new values. So we know from our variables table that the values currently for type are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So our 1, dorms, is just going to stay a 1. So I put in, take a 1, turn it into a 1, add. So basically that one stays the same. Same with 2. Apartment stays as a 2, and 2 becomes our all other category. Here's where things are going to change up a little bit. I'm going to take condo, and I'm also going to put it in this category of sort of all other. 4, I'm sorry, condo. So now I need to specify what the new values are going to be. Click on old and so now I need to specify what the new values are going to be. Click on old and new values. So the old value of 1 was dorm is just going to stay as 1. This will make sense in a second. 2, apartment, that's also going to stay as a 2. But now 2 is sort of our all other category. So here's where things change up. 3, which is house, we're going to recode that as a 2. So basically everything that's not a 1 gets turned into a 2. So once I've given it the logic of what to take my old values 1 through 6 and turn it into 1 through 2, I can click continue. So again, the reason we're doing this is so that we can take what was a variable, a nominal variable with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different options, and turning it into a binary or dichotomous variable with 2 options. So we can compare every respondent with the value of 1 with all respondents with the value of 2. Now that I've gone ahead and specified the old and new values, I've put in my name and my label, I can go ahead, tell it to run that command. I can either minimize or delete that. Here's my new variable, type new. And what I'm going to do is drag this up next to my type variable just because I want to be able to see them side by side. So I can switch from variable view over to data view. And here's what we have. Now it happened to have tagged on two zeros after the decimal point, but that's not really going to matter for the purpose of our analysis. But what you see here is that everything that was a 1 stayed as a 1. Anything that wasn't a 1 was turned into a 2. So here's our original type variable with several different response options, and here's our new variable with 2 options, either in a dorm or other. So that's one type of a data transformation that might be helpful. I want to talk to you about one other type that you may or may not need to use. So let's say instead of trying to group things the way we just did, what I want to do is simply change the codes. Now I could have done this in Qualtrics when I did recode. Well, I can do the same thing here if I forgot to or decided I needed to approach things a little bit differently. Let's say, for example, decor. I had originally specified that as a 1 through 7, where 7 was strongly agree. Let's go ahead and do transform recode into different variables. I'll take that decor variable. First I need to take this one out. We don't want to overwrite the type. So I just want to put in my decor underscore 1 new. I want to change that old and new values. Well, the first thing I need to do is clear this all out. This is the logic from the last variable, and we don't want to apply that in this case. So okay, the next thing that I want to show you how to do is to recode values. If you remember back when we were in Qualtrics, I showed you how to look at the values and how they were being coded, and you could modify them there. Well, for whatever reason you didn't, or you just changed your mind about how to recode them, that's something we can do here as well. So for example, let's say that you want to take the decor variable. Right now that's coded as 1 through 7. And let's say for whatever reason you want to reverse code it. Instead of 7 being strongly agree, you want to make 1 strongly agree. So you want to turn your 1 into a 7 and your 7 into a 1. Well, you can use the same process of transform, recode into different variables. Let's go ahead and hit reset within here, right down here. That's going to clear out the logic that we had in there before from the prior example. I'm going to pick decor, and I'll put that in here. Now I need to enter in my new variable name, decor new, click change, and now I need to specify the old and new values. So you would know from your variables table that this was coded as a 1 through 7. And if I wanted to reverse code it, in other words, take the 1 and make it a 7 and the 7 and make it a 1, here's what I would do. Put in 1 as my old value and 7 as my new value. And I would simply go through and repeat this process until I had identified all of the transformations that needed to happen. So 4 actually stays as a 4, 5 becomes a 3, 6 becomes a 2, and 7 becomes a 1. I'm going to select OK, minimize my output. Now, here's my new variable, decor 1 new. I'm going to move it next to my decor 1 so I could more easily compare those. Now under data view, what do we have? You see how the codes have been reversed. So what was a 1 on the scale has become a 7. What was a 2 has become a 6, and so forth. Another reason for creating a new variable is maybe you want to combine two variables into one. Let me give you an example. This rent question was interesting in that we asked people how much rent they pay, but we asked them for their whole dwelling. It wasn't really rent per room. So let's say you wanted to create a new variable of rent per room. That way you could more easily compare rent in all these different dwellings. So we've got the data for rent and we have the data for the number of bedrooms. What we can do is create a new variable, and this time instead of a recode, what we're going to do is a transform compute variable. So I need to give it a name, something that's going to make sense to me. So I'm going to call this rent per room, and that is going to be calculated by taking my rent variable, and then I want to divide that by the number of bedrooms. And there are all sorts of different mathematical transformations you could apply. I'm doing a simple division here, but you could, depending on your purposes, use one of these. Go ahead and click OK. It's going to run that command, and here's my rent per room. Let me go ahead and put that next to, I'm going to drag that variable again and put it next to the rent variable. And let's compare the two. If we go back to data view, so here's rent, and then here's the new computed variable that took the number of rooms and divided rent by number of rooms, and now we have a new rent per room value. So those are the basics of importing data, some simple things we can do to provide some additional labels, compute some new variables, and next we're going to move on with graphing the data and visualizing data before we start to perform any of the analyses.